Are you ready? Okay, welcome everyone. This is the July 8th, 2021 meeting of the Topeka City Council's Public Health and Safety Committee committee. We have two members here in the room and one joining virtually. Let's go ahead and introduce.
Christina Valdivia Alcala, District 2 representative.
Neil Dobler, District 7.
And I'm Karen Hiller, the chair, and I represent District 1. It looks like the messages got out pretty clearly today. This committee has been dealing over the last year and a half, really, with issues of gradually working toward a property and premises proposal that would go to the council and out for public hearings, working on broadband, and working on homeless issues. Today, we are focusing only on the property and premises issues. We will touch on some updates about the other two in the process of setting the agenda for July 30th, but our primary focus for this meeting is the property and premises proposals. Are there questions or concerns about that? Okay. With that, the first action item on our agenda is to approve the minutes from the May 26th meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
And Councilwoman Valdivia has motioned and Councilman Dobler seconded the approval of the minutes. I am assuming that that is approval of the latest version that we got. We've had an amendment, a couple of amendments to page 7. I would like to suggest to the group, and it's up to you, we got a further explanation from Mike Haugen from Code Compliance about 15 minutes ago. And rather than debate the minutes, I would suggest that we simply append that additional clarification to the minutes and include it. How does that sound? Okay, it's fine with the person who made the motion. Councilman, is it okay to add that? All right. And with that, I would say that it is a little tricky to understand. The question was, what can the public see? There's a fairly complex answer to when it goes off the public view and what's happening in court and whether it's closed and reopened. Is that the Cliff's Notes of that?
Sure, yes.
Okay. I appreciate you taking the time, and Liz, to clarify that, in that if somebody is reading the minutes to find out how things work, it was challenging. So.
And I don't believe I expressed that. So Once I read it, I realized that it was missing a key element of when they're closed.
And when you discuss that, once a case goes off the public view in order to go to court, if it gets stalled in court and you all reopen it as a case that you're carrying, does it ever reappear for the public to see where it is?
Yes, I want to back up a little.
Okay.
So we don't close it out and take it off unless the person has failed to appear in court and a warrant's issued for their arrest, or the court has disposed of the case, meaning they've found them guilty, not guilty, they've made their ruling. The only two times we do, if it's a warrant for their arrest, we still have the case. We don't leave it open because the software system would have us rechecking that property over and over and over again, and would create a big backlog. So we remove it as an open case and have it closed. Once that person appears in court and then a court date is set and that they got to go see the judge, we reopen it, we re-inspect it, and that's available to the public.
Okay.
I do have one question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And is the same case number assigned?
It's the same case. It's just closed out so that we don't have to do re-inspections. There's no point in doing a re-inspection. It's in violation. It's waiting for a court date. And then we'll open it back up once we know that we're going to start getting involved in the property again.
Thank you for that clarification along the way.
Sure.
And today. It may be that once we get into the suggestions for what to do to improve, that there would be suggestions, as there have been, to figure out some way that the next door neighbor can figure out what the heck's going on with the case in that interim time, but that's for another time. So with that clarification, motion and second, all in favor of approving these minutes as amended, say aye.
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 Thank you. Opposed? Minutes are approved, and we will move into our working discussion of the property and premises proposal. At this point, for those who are watching that are not familiar, we've had a series, an extended series of educational sessions with Mr. Haugen about how the process is working today, and have begun to develop, have had lots of discussion at the council level, council committee level of problems, issues, possible solutions. What we have before us today is a proposed challenge statement, if you will, to the city manager and the staff, observing some facts, setting some guidelines, and setting some goals for us to improve our system. And there's an understanding, though Mike is the only staff person here today, that there are multiple departments involved in the issues that have come up and that can be involved in the solutions. So our challenge today, if we can do it, is to go through this working document to get it ready, either no change. This is what people saw last time, the last couple of times. Either no change or make some changes to this preliminary recommendation from this committee, at which point we would, and you all now have a calendar proposal. The idea would be then that we would recommend it out of committee. The council would challenge the staff to give us a response within 10 days of how they would expect to meet these challenges. We would get it by the 20th of July so that we as a committee have it in time. There it is up on the board too. That we as a committee would have it in time to review and consider, so that we would spend the time discussing those responses at our meeting on July 30th, with the idea that we would not be resolving everything that day, but that we'd be getting ready to take both our recommended challenge as well as the city's preliminary answer to the council for them to understand what we've been doing and where we are, as well as out to some public hearings.
Does that say the 23rd or the 20th? 7,
23.
okay. So the first response by 7:23.
Yeah, they'd get it to staff by the 22nd. I'm sorry. We got another one due the 20th, the broadband one.
Okay.
So sorry about that. Wasn't reading it.
And I do have a question, Chair.
Absolutely.
Do I have to raise my hand?
No,
Okay.
it's fine with me.
Okay, so just to make sure, what we're going to be going over is, I just want to verify this.
Absolutely.
Topeka Property and Premises Enforcement and Improvement 2020, last update, 12/14/20.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have something to put on the screen so folks watching can see?
Do you have this document from the agenda? Not the timeline, but the document itself is what she was asking for.
You want to see what I have?
What's on the back of this?
It's the second page of the agenda.
I can grab it off your desk.
Oh, yes. Right.
Yes, that one.
So you want that by the 23rd? 22nd?
By the 22nd, and that's all. We had to miss a meeting that was scheduled last month, but based on the conversations with the city manager was that a 10-day response turnaround would be fine, because the staff has been working on it for some time. That's a little more than 10 days, but anyway.
I think so. I mean, I think Mike and I have talked, there's been a lot of ideas that he already has planned or has been studied. See how you feel about that, for sure, again.
Sure, one of my concerns though is that you acknowledge this is many departments, and I'm the one responsible for responding to all of these when it's not going to involve my department.
I'm going to put that over, that's up to the city manager
So I
and
need to
however
just
you all
find
structure the
what
team.
else I need from other
Okay,
Yeah.
departments.
Why are other departments here right now?
It has been you all can answer that, I guess.
But,
Why aren't more departments here as we're talking about?
well, it
you know,
ends up, most of
coordinating?
this is initiated and identified by property maintenance. And then the items that aren't his, then we need to forward to the other departments in order to address. Primarily, you're talking, it could be traffic, could be forestry, those types of things.
Cars in yards, sidewalks that are bumpy,
police.
all the things that people think are code, that the issues that we were dealing with actually have some, they're spread around in some cases from different departments, like the vegetation issue, which forestry has the equipment for and does some of, but we're talking about ramping up how we address it.
Got it.
But the fact that it was multi-departmental is one of the things that emerged as we continued to work on this and appropriately so.
Got it.
So the idea being that once we've got this, we'll call it preliminary, because if in the course of the hearings we want to change some wording or whatever, we can. But that response would give us and the public an idea of what the staff's first steps would be. Would also theoretically lay out the things that may need to be community-wide initiatives, that we need to brainstorm how to raise the bar from where it is today to where we would like to see our city look or function, whether that's what the strategies would be to reduce substandard housing or to improve the look of vegetation and so on. How are we going to do that? We definitely have wanted public input. The sense from the calendar that we have here is, at least this is mine and we need to confirm, is that the council members, through their experience and so on, and as well as the kind of complaints that we get consistently, have been pretty well aware of what the complaints were, so that by having this proposal and the staff's response, that when we take it out for public hearings, the focus of the hearings would be, do you have any suggestions for how we can work smarter, faster, better to solve these problems, rather than spend those hearings hearing again what the problems are or what the challenges are. That's naturally going to come out. But as far as I'm concerned, the focus of engaging the public and the council would be ideas for ways to go to yes on everything, to be successful, and to then provide those ideas to staff. Because we do need those ideas, and that, in my view, as your chair, would make the hearings, the process more public engagement. There could be a survey as well. Staff is good at doing that, so that we come up with more than we started with when we get done.
I do have some questions on this as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. First, I wanted to find out, under the aspirational goals, when it states that our number of substandard properties is never over 500. And I'm thinking what you mean by the substandards, that is, you're specifically talking code enforcement cases on houses, on what all is part of that substandard properties. What all does that entail, since I'm new?
That's actually been one of the biggest parts of the discussion on the first one, is what is substandard. We've seen substandard to mean having one violation of the property maintenance code. So if the guy needs to be painted as a substandard house, and it can be viewed that way. Or is substandard unlivable? So, it's a interesting, hard subject to figure out. We've identified it one way in the code as being one violation of the property maintenance code is considered a substandard house, because it has a violation of our code. However, it's not a house that can't live in, or that can't be easily repaired, or something along those That's been one of the hardest parts to really get a handle on. What is the right number of homes? What are we saying is the starting number? And Mike's done some research, planning's done some research, and we're still trying to figure out how do you want to define substandard? And
So is this committee making recommendations for what, based on the municipal code, they determine as substandard, or all of it coming from here?
Well, again, we've been having conversations.
Right.
There were numbers in the housing study that were over 4,000 substandard. And they went to the appraiser who said there were 300. And I said, don't even bring that up at the committee. But, and the code, and I didn't bring mine today, but it does define substandard, that anything that's got a violation is substandard. The other thing that is where the 500 came from, because your predecessors had me write it, was looking at what kind of caseload the code compliance folks have been carrying. Because if we can reduce the number of substandard properties, then people will be safer and they'll be doing much better with safe and affordable housing, but the numbers of inspections and re-inspections and so on should drop when we get the housing stock to a better level.
So what you're saying is what's in here is 500 cases annually. We shouldn't try to have more than 500 cases annually that we're carrying.
We could define it that way. The challenge there is that could just be driven by how many inspections our people do. So we may need to define substandard or define that goal a little bit better.
Okay, so properties is never over 500. 500 in what time period or time frame? That's what we still have to define?
Well, the way this reads is that it would be no more than 500 at any given time.
right, and it's very hard to make that a reasonable goal and how established it based on how many cases they handle in a year. More than likely, I mean, we're doing thousands.
We're doing 4,000 housing cases a year, and there are houses that get up to standard that within 6 months become substandard again because they're older homes and the porch wasn't broken when we cited it, but a window was. So we cite, they fix the window, weather comes, the porch is now in violation. There's well over 500 houses with how old our houses are every year that met the criteria of being a acceptable house that will fall out of that. I'm concerned about those numbers. If we had it pie in the sky that we could cut it down to that, we would actually be citing for small violations, broken screen or whatever. I can tell you that we have well over 500 every year of those broken screens. I mean, it's a number that concerns me deeply that's put in this that I'm asked to agree upon. We've taken significant steps to address the housing issues, provide opportunities for people to get their properties repaired, including $750,000 grant that people can apply for and have $20,000 applied to their house without having to pay it back if they meet criteria. I don't know how to get to that 500 number with the staff that I have and the condition and the age of the houses within the city.
Okay, and let me ask another question about this. So this is an aspirational goal.
Right.
So I see in reduce current substandard structures by 50% in 5 years, but this aspirational goal, are we putting a number of years to get to that point? No. Why? That's just an honest question. I just want to understand.
And frankly, it's because of conversations just like this. And so to come up with something that's much more measurable and a shorter term seemed like a good first step to therefore be able to put some real numbers to a plan
Understood.
that was in a reasonable time.
So when we met in May, and I went to the MyGov, which I was supposed to get new numbers, and I've never received them after this was
Do you have
cleaned
them?
up.
I sent those to you.
If I apologize,
And
and
you
I didn't
responded
open
that
the
you got
email.
them.
That is scary.
Yeah, because you said thank you, I'm glad to know that it was just a glitch.
Liz, maybe that was Liz.
So it was on, yeah, I sent you the updated numbers on May 27th.
Okay, thank you. I will make sure and look at those. But once those are all corrected, we're still looking at within districts 1, 2, and 3, we're looking roughly at about 500, a little bit over cases the last time I looked in each district. Then when you start going to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, they are greatly reduced. So I think like Lesser's district has like 60 to 90, somewhere between 60 and 90.
61.
Yeah, so it gets lower, and so I'm thinking the challenges that we have in these older neighborhoods and what I believe is a lack of, I believe that we need, as I've stated before, more code enforcement officers, and then you get into the big dialogue, well, then we're gonna need more abatement crew, then we're gonna need more judges, on and on and on and on. And the other thing is I also believe that part of this should be, and I don't know if we put it into this document or if this is gonna come at a different point, we need a time study in the department. So I think that if this is going to be a workable document that you want people, you want the department to sign up on, I think that we are gonna have to attach a time frame to that, because can you imagine trying to get our first 3 districts? I mean, that's like 1,500 cases more or less right there. And I'm just trying to
I
think about
would
this.
suggest that for the aspirational goal, that one's the timeless one. We want to get there
timeless.
and we want to stay there.
And that's why you don't attach anything to it,
Correct.
because you're
Correct.
aspiring to.
Correct.
Okay.
But then you get down then under the 4 more specific challenges to start tightening that up so that there are shorter term and more measurable goals. One of the things about the number of cases is that, and it's addressed in a different one of the goals, is that of the numbers that you see on that MyGov count that we're talking about, some of them are more than one case on the same property. And we've also, one of the things that has come up in the discussions is if the property isn't totally written up the first time, so that it's in sequence all the time, because all we did was write up the paint when the porch needed to be even just on an exterior, if everything isn't written up, then it's really grinding on our property owners and tenants, whoever, and the neighbors. And if there's really that many things, if they get written up once and then they get it all fixed, it starts to reduce the amount of wear and tear on everyone involved and get more properties.
And reduce the overall amount of cases.
Correct. By simply getting all the write-up done the first time out of the chute
Which we do.
and following it through.
And Chairwoman, I would argue we do. What you're asking, when we go to a house, we cipher everything that we can see from public view and that we can gain access. And there are times we can't see a back porch, so we don't write it, and we probably will never write it unless a neighbor says, please come to my house, stand in my back window and look at the porch. And then we would write that one. We do cite all of those. So I don't know what.
You're looking at somebody who's got 100 people that got written up for paint only, who are mad about the neighbors who have stuff in their yard and the neighbors who have this and that and the other.
So you're talking separate of a
agree.
sanitation case or a vehicle case.
They're all in your code.
Of course, they're all in our code.
Right.
They all have different time frames. And when a house is in violation for peeling paint, that car might not be in violation today. So then when it is in violation, we will then cite it. But if it is today, it has a requirement of X amount of days. The house has a requirement of X amount of days. We cannot lump them all into one. The software program won't do it. The staffing, it will create errors within staffing and confusion. What we have done is we have fine-tuned the entire system to where we understand it, make the minimal mistakes as we can do, and we continue to fine-tune it. But to put it all on one, and then a new case come up tomorrow because they now dump trash in the yard, but it wasn't there yesterday. There's nothing but confusion in what you're envisioning in that situation.
Why?
A housing case has 60 days. A weed case has 10 days. A sanitation case has 14 days. All of them also have different responses regarding the court and the process of notification and follow-up inspections, and then sending it to court to get the warrant. And you're gonna have this big, giant, long case that it goes forever on one property with all these different dates of follow-up inspection. So when I go to the sanitation and I click it, if I miss a vehicle because it's all in there, then I've missed it, or the housing case. They're separate cases because they occur separately, constantly. The house that has the bad porch doesn't have trash today, but it has trash next Wednesday. It's not one case.
Well, I would, a couple of things here. I would venture to say that there are a lot of houses that I believe are in my district that have continually had the trash there, and it's not being dealt with in the way that I'm being told it is. But the other thing about that is, have we looked at any cities comparable to our size that do it like you're envisioning with that all-in-one method?
My vision comes from the fact that the first 15 years I worked here in code compliance and tenant landlord, that's how they did it, and it worked fine.
Really?
Yeah. So.
Honestly, I didn't know that.
So
I'm newbie, so.
No, and so nobody.
But there are legal issues that relate to why we do it the way we do.
Yeah, I've done some following up on the timing. You're talking about the 80s. And I've done some following up with staff that worked there. And it was out of the county. There was 3 inspectors that did not do proactive enforcement. They did reactive enforcement. This is from the staff that worked there. There was some proactive enforcement.
Sure was.
But it was mostly reactive enforcement. They were able to go and mow, take the property and stuff without going through the processes that we do now. The attitude and the thought process of our community was strongly different then. A neighbor was embarrassed to have trash in his property. Not quite the same anymore.
That doesn't mean that we can't educate to get back to
We
that point.
absolutely can, and I believe that we are doing it frequently with the messages that we are, the personal notices that we're walking up and talking to people saying it can't be this way anymore. It doesn't mean we can get to everybody. We have a lot of issues out there in the community, and we have a lot of people that are, I think hoarding has become, I don't know, a new trend that wasn't there as much before. But it's not the same as it was in 40 years ago, 41 years ago. And the laws have changed and the requirements.
And
We have to do it.
and so you're talking about all of these things. You're talking about 40 years ago. The houses that we're looking at now are now a lot older. We're talking about that a lot of these houses that we're talking about are now rental properties, which put additional challenges on them. We're also talking about, I want to add into this, is that with as few enforcement officers as you have, I'm just going to say, you guys may feel that you're doing the best job you can with giving them all the additional services that they can go to, and you may actually be. But the bottom line is that you cannot be doing this yourself. There has to be that collaborative effort, like we've talked about. I think I saw something in here about NIAs and all of this. Well, we also know what's happening with the NIAs. We know that they're dying. So it can sound really nice to put something like that in what we're looking at, but the reality is that's not what's actually happening right now. And so, part of what I think that we should have in here is how we work as a city in whatever department it is to help reinvigorate, our NIA. So we know that we're looking at different things back when you're saying, Karen. I do believe, though, that if we don't keep pushing and looking for a more proactive formula, because I'm just going to be honest, I think you guys are more reactive than proactive. That's just me.
And I'm telling you, we are right
You
now.
know,
Every day that my inspectors walk in right now, because I have 5, I can't get anybody to apply. They have an average of, each inspector has an average of 60 cases backlogged that they have to go and re-inspect or cite because of complaint. They can't do 60. You can't do 60 in a day. So they get it down and they get it knocked down to 30. And then when they come in the next day or they come in Monday, it's back at 60. I can promise you they're going to the case. they're addressing whatever needs, and they're going to the very next one because they're trying to get back to zero so they can be proactive. Right now, we are not very proactive, and there's no possible way we can be with the staffing that we have and the shortage. If anybody that happens to watch this on Channel 4 or the news network knows somebody that has building experience that wants to apply to be a code inspector for 6 months, I cannot fill these positions. I got 2 applicants that I'm going to interview next week. That's it. 2.
But
Okay,
then-
I'm gonna do a little timeout on the back and forth in that, we know that if, for lack of a better phrase, we're down in the weeds here on the immediacy, in that as we have had these conversations along the way, the idea was, all right, we need to figure out a way to set some aspirational goals, to set what we do want, and then work together, council, staff, and ideas from the public, hopefully having that be contributing to the neighborhood in action and ownership as well, to look at strategies to get to what we want our city to be like and what we want our system to go like, not to lay it all on Mike's frontline guys and gals day to day, because they're swamped and they're great. And so, in my opinion, they work hard and they get a lot done. But if we want to lighten that load on them, we want the city, the quality of the housing stock in the premises to be greater, and to roll into that caseload less often, because we have raised the bar in the city. The idea of this was to say, what is it that we want it to be like?
Right.
And then how do we get there? And to spend our time talking about ways that we could get there.
Well, and I would just say, I understand what you're saying, but I understand that I've only been like to a handful of meetings.
Right.
And I take this responsibility seriously.
Yeah.
And I am not one to have meetings behind closed doors. I want the questions I ask to be out there for the public to see, for constituents to see, to know that I'm asking the questions I need to ask. I understand what you're saying, though, because you've been working on this for a long time, but some of this dialogue is going to happen for me to get comfortable to where I need to be. But
That's
I
fine.
understand what you're saying.
I just, I want to make sure that as we move along, that we've got our eye on the prize, and that
Absolutely.
we ended up rolling over a committee change year last year. And so just functionally, for us to have accomplished this and pushed it out for everybody's benefit, if we can get it done before the end of the year. And once you start looking at the timeline, which you've got the calendar in front of you, and if we can get done by the end of October so that we can get it to the council in December, there we are.
Right.
And we all, again, the staff's been involved, and so I don't want to slow down your questions, but I just was wanting to encourage that we need to focus on, agreeing on what the goals are and solutions
Right.
as much as possible.
And and both of us have,
Yeah.
close to the same
I think
level
so.
of cases and stuff. So we both have a huge chunk invested
We
in this
do.
for our districts.
So go ahead. I just wanted to make sure we
I-
didn't
I
end up
forgot where
losing
I
our
was.
time.
Go ahead. No, I'm good for now.
Okay.
I'm good.
Councilman Dobler hadn't been sure at first that he would be here. He had given me a couple of questions in advance of this meeting, and I'll give you a break. And Councilman Dobler, one of your questions had been, does zoning enforcement need to play a bigger role? Is there more that we should include with them? We do have zoning listed as one of the engaged departments. So was there some conversation that you wanted us to have today about that, Councilman, or just maybe more when we're talking about solutions?
Well, it was really just a question. I'm not sure I understand how zoning enforcement gets involved in these issues, if they do at all. And it might be good just for us to understand how that happens.
City Manager? I'm thinking of a couple, but go ahead.
A couple often, and they've happened in Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala's area, is that people in their homes or a piece of property that's in a neighborhood start a business of a certain type. Most often it's vehicle repair, and they're running a shop out of their house or out of a property that isn't zoned for that. And it starts off slow and it builds, and people get careless with their storage of the vehicles, either on the street or on their property. And so the complaint comes in and they say there's a junk car on the property, and so property maintenance will go look at it. And in the end, it ends up being partially theirs and then partially zoning, because then zoning has to go out and investigate what's actually occurring at that residence or that property. And so they end up being a part of that discussion in the end. One advantage we have now is that a person that used to work in Mike's department is now doing the zoning inspecting. So she understands both components of the process. And so that has helped with the coordination, wouldn't you agree, Mike?
Yes.
And so there's been a lot more progress that's been made. She can recognize whether it ends up being a zoning issue or whether it's really a property maintenance issue. So zoning is beginning to take a bigger role in what we're doing, so that is true.
There are two more that I think of. One is that it is zoning that gives the fence permits. And we had one of those recently, so if somebody's got a problem with the height or the location of a fence, that's a zoning issue. Also, signage, and with what we've just gone through with COVID, you know, I've been familiar with some where somebody had a little small, maybe they had a little packaging and mailing service, or, you know, shoe repair or alterations or something like that. Technically, you're not supposed to have a sign, a business sign, unless it's zoned as a business. We may see more of those as more people are working from home. I don't know, and people aren't sure. That may be the only complaint that they have, or there may be multiples.
And as I learn more about the process, these are the zoning and where, you know, code enforcement get involved. You know, there is one in Oakland that's happening, you know, right now, that about 2 weeks after I got on council, I started working on it. We're looking at 1.5 years. And finally, you know, there was a warrant, and I know that COVID held some of that up, but I don't think that we can look just at COVID. I think that these have been long-standing issues, and I also think one thing that with the officer going over to zoning is that there is definitely a need for more communication between departments. I mean, that is just a given, and can clog things up as well. So I agree.
And I've seen emails between staff about certain issues when they're looking at it that definitely shows that that's occurring more than it did in the past. And with her past experience, I think that Megan is much more interested in getting out and looking at things. She's used to being out in the field and going after these types of situations. And I think the inspectors and property maintenance feel comfortable reaching out to her and saying, hey, I got one over here that I think needs your attention. So I think that's occurring much more than it has in the past.
And I've got a question in right now because I couldn't remember, but the sight lines on the street corners, if there's vegetation, cultivated or not, that's growing up on somebody's property so that it's more than 30 inches and you can't see.
Right, that's a forestry, usually enforcement. If I
That's a
remember
forestry enforcement? Okay.
correctly. I mean, don't,
When those happen, I send it out to traffic engineering and forestry and say, hey, there's something growing on the corner. And it's theirs, so I leave it at that.
Okay.
I think it's forestry.
I just couldn't remember which department. This is just like
well, the issue
last week
is
or something.
a lot of times the determination is done by traffic to determine whether it violates the sight lines that they want to see at an intersection in order to keep it safe. If the property owner wouldn't do it, then we would be calling forestry to abate it.
Okay.
And that's why forestry ends up getting involved in a lot of ways with that.
Well, and Councilman Dobler's second question on this email that I have from a couple weeks ago was whether street partners in when heavy equipment's needed.
It has been lately. We
Yeah.
got a couple examples recently.
I have outstanding working relationship with the street department. Tony Trower is the one that I communicate with. And everything that I've asked of him, he has done that much and more. They've been fantastic to work with.
Yeah, they recently hauled 7 truckloads of trash away from Lowell Street because of dumping. And then they placed concrete barricades on the streets to close it so that it is not accessible anymore. And so that relationship continues to grow, and we're working together to accomplish stopping the dumping so we don't have to do the cleanup.
That's good to hear, and I think that that's the reason all these different departments were listed, and that those kinds of ideas, we could either celebrate them if they were happening, or maybe somebody would have that idea or say, why don't, in the process of visiting here with the council and then with the public, that a lot of times people have had those ideas, maybe in the form of a question.
I did have a question.
I've got, let me
we
read,
start
go
one
through the third one that
Okay.
from Councilman Dobler, and then we'll go back to you. He wondered if he noted that the biggest complaints came about things in yards, and wondered if this proposal would help address those. And the answer is yes, both in the specifics as well as that being one of the big issues that everybody sees. And so raising the bar overall in the community, having that culture that we, like Mike talked about from the 80s, where it just wasn't okay instead of tolerated, so that less and less of that occurred in the first place, and further that neighbors would help one another or lean on one another, depending, so that it didn't require city staff to go out and meet the community standard. And so that's kind of what's built into all four of those action steps. Does that help on that? Okay. Do you have anything else?
I do have one more question, maybe a little bit off the current topic, but it's relevant because I had this complaint in my district. A house that is clearly abandoned. The complaint was centered around grass, and fortunately, when I contacted Mike, it was already on the list and got mowed within a couple of days, and would have anyways without the contact. So that's good. That indicates that the process is working. My question is, as I researched the property a little bit, and based on the neighbor that I talked to, gentleman that owned the house had passed away a year or two ago. And it's even prior to that, hadn't paid taxes. I think the last time taxes were paid were like 2014, so 6 or 7 years. So here's a house that's actually in probably pretty decent shape right now, but has clearly been abandoned. A lot of times when people own a house and pass away, there's somebody, whether it's a spouse or one of their kids, that will at least take responsibility for getting the house sold or whatever. This clearly isn't the case. I just wonder is there a mechanism that can help us, if it's get that house to the sheriff's sale or whatever's done now with back taxes, because clearly nobody wants it. It's going to sit there and continue to deteriorate until it's essentially meets the criteria of that's on this list, but it's not there yet. So a little bit of prevention could delay a lot of headache down the road. So maybe, I know this is not fair, I sent Mr. Trout an email to this effect just a few minutes before this meeting, so he hasn't had a chance to respond, but maybe Mike or Brent can talk to that issue. Are we proactive about trying to get these properties sold and into the hands of somebody that can take care of it? Thank you.
I'm familiar with the house you're talking about, and we are proactive to the point that we do send those houses to the county to put them on the tax sale. We've went to the state capitol and testified in front of committee trying to pass a state law that would give the city the right to obtain those houses when we discovered that there is no interested party, that they're there, and then donate those to a nonprofit, requiring the nonprofit to get it habitable. That has been vetoed and then not got out of committee. So we've tried to be proactive in that situation. And the house that you're talking about, I've looked at the history of the children, because there are some children. I'd like to see this go to the tax sale. The children have court cases where they've claimed poverty, and they have court cases where there were violent crimes. To force them back into that house it's probably not beneficial to the neighborhood, especially if they're already filing on multiple bankruptcies, divorces that say we're divorced because of poverty. They're not going to have the money to fix or maintain that property. Ideally, we get it to the county tax sale as fast as we can. I hate saying COVID really strung it along, but it did. And then the county isn't going to put too many properties on the sale at one time, or they'll oversaturate the market, and the people that are there bidding at auction won't be prepared to handle the properties that they're buying, which frequently happens. People get a property for $3,000 and find out there's 50 grand in repairs, and they can't do it. Now they're on the hook trying to maintain a property they should never have bid on.
How many do
So-
you recommend a year tax sale?
I don't know how many they do.
I mean, how many do you send recommending
Oh,
that they go
we
to?
send them weekly. So anytime that we discover a property is 3 years or longer on taxes, it's a form. The county's made it simple. They got a form on the Shawnee County Counselor's Office to recommend properties for the tax sale. And when we start dealing with properties like the one you're talking about, we send it over to them as soon as we figure. It's a really easy form. Anybody can do it. Any neighbor can do it. It just says, what's the property? Are you interested in buying the property? Because if you're interested in buying the property, it will move it up in their excitement list. They'll go, look, somebody wants to buy it. So it's an easy process, and like the one that you're talking about has already been forwarded, and I think I checked with the county, and it was on the 2022 list, if I'm right. But don't hold me to that one, but I'm pretty sure that that's what it was. So we're being proactive in that manner. When it comes to a property and there's no owner, there's no owner. And we have thousands of them in the city.
I do have a question on that, on going to the state legislature on that. You said that you all testified?
Yes.
And what committee was that before?
It was a committee for the statute, or if that's the right word that we were putting.
I'm not sure, I can't remember what.
I don't know that John was actually on the committee.
Well, I was just asking if you also, included what you were trying to do with the Shawnee County delegation
Oh,
to
yes.
try to put
Yes.
some
That's probably the only reason.
fire under them.
Yeah.
That's probably the only reason it got to as far as it did was because of the county delegation. We were really the ones that were pushing it within the legislature. And then it got to a certain point, and there was an individual from Republican leadership that did not want to see it progress and killed it in committee. And so it didn't even get brought up last year, the year before when it was a shortened session, or this year. We have our lobbyist that is constantly looking, that if there is any push or interest again, I think it's probably time for us. That leadership person is no longer there. So I think we need to re-engage for next year to potentially get this to happen. There was pretty broad-based support, but leadership was able to get it stopped. So I think there's an opportunity there again as we go into next year.
Right. Take the council people from the districts who really need it with you.
Yeah,
and-
yeah, we will, definitely.
Done that. Been there, done that.
Well, I haven't yet.
No, yeah,
so-
that's good.
The other comment I will make is that one of the ideas that we explored, even back when Sasha was here, she was pursuing it, was Wyandotte County Unified Government has a process with a land bank that takes properties such as this that will go to tax sale, and then they work with a developer and get the house fixed up and back out onto the market. It's a very involved process, but it is something that we've been looking at. It's a little harder for us, to do than it is unified government. Unified government, a city works with the county, who's the same, to put what ones they want to go on tax sale that they want to renovate, and they then put those on tax sale. City gets ownership to them and then does the process. Here, we can't control that as much, and we can make suggestions on which homes. We'd have to develop the mechanism and get contractors on board. The reason it works is that we get the house for less money, we do the renovation, the house is worth a higher value. The person, low income, that wants to get into that house already has 20% or more equity in the house because they're able to buy it for a lower cost than what it's truly worth, and we're able to get people to take those homes. And so it's a concept that's been used there, and we need to circle back with them and see how it's going and see whether that's something we want to look at. It is one of those areas that when we talked about the Housing Trust Fund, that potentially some of the money from the Housing Trust Fund would be utilized to renovate those homes. Instead of building brand-new homes, we take these homes that need some help and need somebody to take them over and pursue that. So just a concept that might be a solution.
Well, what I'm thinking out of that is, what's interesting is we already have a state law that lets a city pluck a property out ahead of the tax sale, but it's to give it to a nonprofit, and people have held back, I guess, because no matter how you do that, there's either a 6-month or a 1-year period whereby rightful owners can come back and reclaim it anyway, and it's held people off, and that property right has been a difficult one to buck, not just in Kansas, but anywhere. Also, we do give credit where it's due. I think it was Sasha in Neighborhood Relations that got the county to create that form and make it available to our staff, but to any citizen to turn in a property that they thought should go on the tax sale. All that looped around in terms of us doing problem solving, it probably would be worth it just to, in this string at the top of our sheet, of our document, to include either Shawnee County or the Shawnee County tax sales, probably right next to KDOT in that string as an example of partners that we would look to. And with KDOT, it's mostly mowing, but the tax sales are important enough because in Wyandotte County, for instance, they do tax sales twice a year. A lot of, and our county just hasn't wanted to do that. But, again, it could need to be a collaborative thing. They are worried. Apparently, they would end up owning the property if it doesn't sell at all, and so they don't want to end up owning a bunch of property. One of the problems with land banks has been that you got to be in a hot market, or else you've just signed yourself up to be a developer with nothing, all the expenses and responsibilities, and no buyers. And so whether we approach it by just making our neighborhoods and those properties more appealing and getting them moved directly to private owners and supporting it that way, which is what we've done. But nonetheless, those are things that would be explored as we explore those solutions to yes. But I am thinking that because it's such a big part of our challenge, that adding Shawnee County or Shawnee County tax sales would be a good idea, just so it's not overlooked. Yep. And legislative changes, which I would probably stick in just after neighborhood associations in that same string, just so we've at least highlighted those kind of a checklist of who to make sure we didn't forget as we do that. So those are good questions and good discussion. So thank you.
I did, on number 1 where it says reduce current substandard structures by 50% in 5 years, establish a system to do complete interior inspections on all structures that appear to need it and or upon request. So I just want to clarify, when we're talking about structures, are apartment complexes included in this as well?
Apartment complexes, commercial structures, any structure.
Yeah, the only restriction we have is that because there's no rental code, we cannot force ourselves into a property. That's just like the example that you worked on. They invited us in to look at their issue. And so we were able to go in and take care of that because they invited us in. So that's the struggle. If we don't get invited into a home to look at substandard issues that they're dealing with as a rental, for example, there's not anything that we can do. We have to know of something that's an issue or be invited in before we can take that. And that's the way the code's set up in the state of Kansas.
Well, once again, that's
Which I don't
property
like,
rights, and so.
I don't like it. I was used to, in Iowa, you had, any town over 8,000 had to have rental inspection on an annual basis.
In Iowa?
Yep.
But the issue, again, and without beating the old horse, back in the day, that was never a problem. And now my point of view was I was with what is now housing and credit counseling. And so the issue is, if the tenant is confident about what their rights are and that is some recourse so that, for instance,
Correct.
the city has an ordinance that prohibits retaliatory evictions as long as somebody's a tenant in good standing. Well, to be confident that if they go ahead and let somebody in and pursue their rights, that they're going to be safe is important. And so it's not just code, and it's creating, it's that culture again. It's saying this is how we want things to be in this town, so that there's some confidence and
I think
and a
there's
good
still
system.
a lot of non-confidence out there for
But again,
retaliation.
That's
Yeah,
why
that's a struggle.
to set the goals
Yeah,
is not,
okay.
for the most part, in my experience, which is fairly hefty, as long as people are confident, then it's not a problem. But it's up to us to make sure that system
I would
is there
agree.
for them.
I would agree.
Okay, more questions? While she's looking, we did get promised a vacant property program update.
Sure. So vacant property, there's 1,400 notices sent out by Pro Champs. Many of those we were well aware were in error on vacant lots, city-owned property, properties that aren't vacant. When we pulled it back from Pro Champs, we took it upon ourselves that we're going to follow up on all 1,400 of those letters before we pursue a vacant structure. We set a goal of 20 per week, and with the staffing that we have, that's a pretty lofty goal because we have to have inspectors go out there. But we've knocked out 400 of the 1,400 so far. As staffing increases, or in the winter when our call load goes down, we'll move it from 20 to 30 to 40, whatever we can handle. So far, we have 49 vacant structures that are compliant, 79 that are non-compliant, for a total of 125 vacant structures that we have identified. In regards to the non-compliant, they most likely have just not responded to the notice of us informing them they have to register. In 6 months, we'll send them notice saying, here is a $250 fine for not registering. You can either register and pay the original $125 and we'll dismiss the $250, or we're just going to continue to tack these $250s on every quarter, which goes on their taxes, until they get registered. So it's definitely a big carrot for them to turn around and get it registered. We foresee that it's going to be resistant just for the mere fact of how this all started out with the 1,400 letters and the frustration that we had. But so far we're moving slow. We want to move slow, focusing on problems that developers show up. If we go too fast, then all of a sudden the problems bombard us. But if we just get one problem at a time and we can fix it, we're good to go. So that's where we are with it.
Related question then, based on the 400, so you addressed 400 and actually, as it turned out, only 128
25?
were vacant?
Yeah.
Out of 400? Wow.
Pro Champs cited vacant lots. We got to go out and confirm it's a vacant lot. Pro Champs cited the city of Topeka for vacant lots. So
Wow.
we have to go out and we have to look at the property. We knew, because as soon as we figured this out, I went out and I went into Oakland and I took the list of all the properties that were cited in Oakland. And it was 60%, 70% weren't vacant, what I was finding. Complete strips of vacant lots, of houses that you can see somebody's living, but then we find out they don't have water, and that's what Pro Champs utilized. So we got a whole new problem that it's not vacant, but it needs to be condemned until they get the water turned back on. So we're just focusing on the vacant. We're taking it slow so that we have minimal error.
Well, this might be a little unfair at this point, so if you don't want to answer it, that's fine too. But when the council approved doing that program, part of the sell was it won't take any of the staff's time and we'll get some revenue out of it. And so obviously we flipped that in a pretty major way. So leaving that aside, the question is, do you think it's been of value to spend the time on the properties that you've discovered?
Yes, I
I think
do.
it's made
First,
a difference.
we started out with Pro Champs. We had them do the foreclose because we really knew there was nothing that we were going to get involved in foreclose, and that went out without a hitch. They notified the banks paid the money, they sent revenue to the city exceeding $100,000 with only a minor amount of administrative computer work that we had to do. So when we saw that that was just a perfect success, we said, you can move into the vacants. When it happened and we saw what they did, and then their explanation of why they did what they did and we weren't satisfied, we took it over. We never wanted this to be an income generator for the city, and that's why the registration was only $125. ProChamp was keeping 100. We were keeping 25 just because we did have some computer work for the vacant registries. Now all 125 comes to us. Will that offset the manpower and time to do this? On the bright side, once we identify the vacant structures, we only have to go back and look at them every 6 months. So an inspector just got to drive out, confirm it's vacant or not, and then say, yes, send the other letter. So there will be manpower involved in this, which is unfortunate, but we've already started, and we're gaining benefits out of it on the contact information and people wanting to move their property that they were just hanging on to speculate. So we got plenty of properties, people are already calling, going, I don't want to pay 125 every 6 months, I can sell it. We are. And so we have some thorns in our side that have already been sold because they don't want to spend any money.
Okay.
If we up the price, we could get more people to sell. But again, I didn't do this to bring money. I did this to
Right.
improve the housing stock in the city.
You know, one of the things that I looked at with the reason that we want to do the program was that sometimes you can have a home that is not violating any of our codes, but it's vacant, and it becomes an inhibition for the neighborhood to be able to grow and expand. And so this gives us a tool that hopefully gets it moved on to someone else that can occupy the building and utilize it. And so that was really the purpose in my mind with having the vacant registry process, was that it was another tool in our toolbox to be able to help neighborhoods and help the city and get people to do development, or at least give it to someone that wants to, or someone live in it instead of it just sitting vacant.
Are you running into many? The ones I hear about often are the ones where somebody died and the family was just not ready to deal with it right away. Are you getting many of those?
I have not heard. My staff, who's the one that mainly deals with it, may have heard of those. But maybe we're giving them the motivating factor to deal with it, and which they need to.
I just wondered, and because you're just now getting into it, to me, to do that within the first year is just agony for the family.
The property has to be vacant for 6 months. So we're going through 6 months through that thing before we even send you a notification.
Yeah.
And if they keep the power on, they keep the water on, it doesn't qualify as being vacant. So then we're not hassling them. It gives them that time.
Unless we figure it out or they voluntarily share that it's vacant. But if it's got water and power, then, and it's being maintained, we have no knowledge until somebody voluntarily tells us.
Well, okay. Well, sounds like we'll get back to that as a body some other time, but we did have the question for the update. City manager said data would be provided about court cases and penalties and the effectiveness of changes.
Yeah, and I missed it. There's been a lot of other things going on.
Okay.
I'm bad, I'm sorry.
Next time, or, you know, if there's an email, since we've got a pretty full agenda next time, that would probably work fine.
Where'd you see that? Where's that at?
I asked,
Oh, okay.
this
I
is,
thought-
you got a copy of it, but I asked Liz to go through the minutes because there were all sorts of things promised in the minutes, reports, and so Liz had made a,
I emailed that.
yeah.
Okay.
And so I'm just reading off Liz's kind of checklist from the
Got it, got it,
minutes.
got it.
Probably an email would be fine, though, city manager. And then the last item from the list was whether federal home loan bank money is
Yeah,
on deck.
I've talked with Corey, and she intends to be reapplying for the Federal Home Loan Bank money.
Okay.
I think that time frame is coming up. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's coming up again. But the intent is definitely to apply. It was a very successful program. A lot of
Sounds good.
individuals were helped with that money to be able to stay in their homes and complete the code violations that they had. So I know that we're going to reapply. He's already told me that.
Great. Thank you for those reports. Okay, back to you, Councilwoman.
On the,
Any questions, any
No.
more questions that you have?
no, I've gone over this, Madam, this other part.
Okay, well, with that then, is there a comfort level in doing a preliminary approval of the document that we had with our agenda, adding Shawnee County tax sales and legislative changes to the list?
You need a motion?
I do.
Motion to add those entities, Shawnee County, and legislative changes.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded to add those two to the list in the first big paragraph. Any further discussion?
I do have further discussion. Not on anything that you have here, but I want to know how we go about determining if we can get a time study, and if so, if it's going to be in this section.
The strategy that we took to lay this out was to have the council set goals and then have the staff propose strategies.
Okay.
That would obviously include conversation, so if a time study would be something that would be suggested and agreed as a strategy toward reaching one of these goals, it would not
Be in
It
here.
would not be in here.
Got it.
But it would be in the strategies
Okay.
that come out ultimately agreed.
Got it.
And that goes back to staff documenting the time frame that it takes to complete, which also goes back to, based on the number of cases, how many individuals we should have employed, those types of things. One clarification though on the time study, I think you mentioned it before, time study was date call comes in, date inspection happens till it gets through the court. Is that the type of time study, or are you looking at what is the amount of time that an inspector spends in their average day and what they're doing?
Yes,
Both?
the former, the last one.
The last one, okay.
I get former and latter mixed up.
Well, the other one we're gonna, we'll work through. I think that information, we can draw a standard model as to what the quickest time frame you could ever expect something to go from start to finish. It's usually never that, but.
No, but we have that.
Yeah, so we can give that to you. But the other one, looking at the time, what an average day is like, and the time study, how long it takes to, look at different properties and what an average day is for an inspector. That's stuff they know.
An actual time study is something that I would need guidance on, and I think that there's somebody that would be trained in doing a time
Maybe
study.
HR or something.
As I've watched
Yeah.
time studies be
Right.
presented, when they're assigned out just to an individual, that individual's doing a random time study and going, here's our presentation. I think it needs to be somebody that knows how to do a time study.
I would agree.
Yeah,
And
not
we
just
should have
somebody you
somebody
assign to.
within the city to do that,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, I'll talk
Yeah.
to Jackie. I know they've done that. in
Much more
various-
likely be in the context of a month,
Yeah,
there's some things
yeah.
that happen once a month or even once a year.
We'll establish some
Bigger
parameters.
picture of
And it's really, okay, this time
what the
study
rhythm
studied,
looks like.
and, you describe what was studied, and then determine, and then you just talk about the results from the study based on the parameters that were established on the study.
Okay, thank you.
I'm assuming, just to add on to that, that part of your vision would be, what does a typical day look like? What does a typical week look like? Typical month look like? And how many cases does that typical person have, and how many of those are new? How many are reopened? How much
Yeah.
follow-up time?
Right.
Some of that, and that's one reason I think that the issue about being able to see the public cases, the status, is you can actually figure that out kind of shoestring anyway yourself by just going and looking at the history on each of the open cases. How many things were written up and when it got written up and when the next steps, if extensions were given, and so on. So there's that. When they drop off because they go to court, then you can't figure it out.
Right.
Takes more. One of the things for me that's since you're talking about that is our guys are phenomenal about returning emails and phone time, but when you're looking at saving time, the more streamlined that process is, and the less they have to do re-inspections, phone calls with people who are upset about something that maybe didn't have to happen that way. that's a time killer.
I would
Yeah,
agree to
so-
some extent on that.
Might need
Sometimes
to be that
that's-
detailed.
Yeah, but also then that goes back to the right customer service level. It is a time killer, but oftentimes that's the best way for an individual to feel like their issue was addressed in an appropriate way. Even Mike has done that, once he hears about
Mike is
it.
good at it.
Calling someone back and saying, here's what we're dealing with. We hear you, but this is what we need to do in order to get to what you want to see. And
I think for those of
them
us that are,
understanding it's important.
those of us that are on the council end, the thing, of course, the cases we get are the ones that people feel very aggrieved about
Right.
and already have some history on, and so it helps to balance that out too.
Okay.
All right, if, with those amendments approved, if someone would want to go ahead and move for a preliminary committee approval of these recommendations.
Move to approve for preliminary committee approval.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Not all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. All right, we have got this moved out. Now, we need to calendar, did not include the request for the return in that vote, so we need to get our calendar, to find it again. How does this calendar look for a proposed rollout? Requesting the staff to
Yeah,
then
we'll-
respond with the proposals?
Yeah, we'll do it may not be complete. There may be certain pieces that we don't have an answer to, but the lot of the components we will have. I mean, Mike's done a lot of work on his end already. Even if I don't have the answers from some of the other departments, we can discuss the components that we do have and the work that we're doing, the strategies that Mike's been talking about. And so
Okay.
he and I will meet again. You and I need to meet again, Mike, and go through that.
And I think probably what would work the best for us is to have you take this recommendation sheet, kind of like we did when we had our working sessions, and just respond
Yeah,
to numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4.
right.
in
Because
terms
there's
of
some things
proposed
that,
strategies.
through the process, like we mentioned about the single notice and what we've worked with legal and trying to do, we need to describe where our roadblocks are on certain things to make sure that you can understand what we can and can't do and how we will work on them. Any of the other issues that we've seen with being able to accomplish what's desired. And it might be that we'll need to modify what ends up being the final goal as far as the method to be able to accomplish that. So,
And I would just say, we have to keep in mind that if the goals as stated are where we want to go,
Yeah.
our strategy needs, our whole focus should be, how do we get to yes on this?
right.
Not belabor too much what seems like a stumbling block, other than to figure out how to get over it.
Well, as long as it doesn't violate our current code or law,
Absolutely.
then we
I would
will
agree
do
with that, what you're
what we
saying.
can to be able to make it happen.
Okay, well, what that would mean then is that we would hear back from staff. Staff would submit their responses to Liz by the 22nd of this month, and then she would get it out by the following day to us on the committee, which would then make it available with the published agenda as well. Then we are scheduled to meet on the 30th. That date right now, which is not on this calendar, but if we're going to address broadband and homelessness and get caught up with homelessness, that we haven't been setting these meetings for more than 2 hours, but that's going to be a full meeting. So partly what we need to keep in mind, back to this calendar, is that we would be receiving and doing maybe a preliminary reaction to what the staff is proposing, but the idea would be that we're then going to share our goals and and their first responses, get them out, brief the council about what's been going on and where we are and where we stand, and then go ahead and get out into the community. And what I what I put down there just for, we've been talking about doing 4 hearings ever since this started. At this point, since we're still in a hybrid option, it would allow doing 2 hybrid meetings, one of which could be during the day and one in the evening, so that it would suit people could come in or dial in. But, and I was gonna sort of stop, I had stopped at that, but I realized that you probably want to do one in District 2, and I want to do one in District 1 as well. And Neil, I don't know if you think doing one actually in the area in West Topeka or Southwest Topeka would be of a strong enough interest to do as well. We don't have
Yeah,
to decide
let me
that
get-
today.
Yeah, let me give that some thought.
But in terms of this calendar, thinking that we'd have 2 that were open to the public, you know, and on Zoom so people could access them, which we'd probably do here, and then likely 2 in the neighborhoods. Thinking through how we've done these kinds of things before and how important it is to so many people. The fact that we can certainly use for instance, the police's Facebook page and the city's Facebook page to put information out, let it advise the public that we're considering those sorts of things, to invite public comment. And then I didn't know if you were interested in doing a survey. The staff has done a good job at those for comments.
I think a survey would be good. I would also ask, will we be offering this possibility for a meeting in her district for Councilwoman Ortiz?
We sure can.
I think we should.
You know, when we first started talking about it, it was live meetings in the 4 quadrants of the city. You know, maybe a little closer in to the older neighborhoods, but to get out. But you know, a year later with COVID and the likelihood that there may be another round, it was like, well, if we're already going to do 2
Right.
that are hybrid, how many of these do we want to be running around doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just going to say for me, I think that what we're looking at is if we can get to where we want to be, this is so major to me
I agree.
that it deserves the work for us to put into it.
Well, to me, if we do those, I've been involved where the council, as a body, did these public hearings, and when the committee or the council has done them, then everyone has gone to each one. It hasn't been split up so that the whole committee is there, and so even 4 is a lot, but I think worth it. But 6 or 8 starts.
Right. No, I understand it. You know, I'm just throwing this out as we're talking, and I doubt if it's going to be possible. But, you know, we always talk about that, you know, we are more than district representatives, that we are representatives of Topeka. And I sure wish that our fellow council persons could come out and look at some of the challenges that we face in the district with some of the higher cases, code compliance cases, property maintenance cases, whatever you want to call them, you know, or even those the ones where they overlap with zoning and code. Because I think that not just anyone has a tendency to stay within their little bubble. And I think that because this feels like it could be, you know, so major in how we want to sell this to community, that we should want to sell this to the whole community of Topeka. And to me, that would mean let's try to see if we can invite our fellow council people to come and have a look.
Well, that's a good idea.
I'm just saying.
City manager,
somewhere.
I put the 10th of April, 10th of August on there, just trying to watch how the calendar would go. Does that sound reasonable for a date that we would do a committee report? That's the day we approve the budget, isn't it? No, it's not.
No,
It
it won't
depends. That depends.
be. Yeah.
If council votes to have the hearing on exceeding revenue
Right.
neutral and considering that,
It'll be
then we're doing
September.
September. If they don't vote to can have that hearing on exceeding revenue neutral, then the 10th would be the date that we would be approving the budget. So I think it's probably best if we shoot for the 17th. The third meeting in August, just move it back 1 week to report.
8/17.
Well, I'm just looking at the window and how many meetings we would each be signing up for to try and get them done before a meeting that was the last week of September. Partly.
Well, I mean, you could still already start that process, and it might be a way to get attention for your meetings that you're having.
Well, if this is a preferred calendar, let's say, and we're voting about whether,
Yeah, we can.
we're voting on Tuesday, right?
Yes, we can modify.
So we could leave it the 10th and bump it to the 17th
Yeah.
if for some reason
Yeah.
we,
We'll adjust if we need to.
okay. Okay. But if we tried to get all of our hearings done before the end of September, and then we meet, I think the 29th is a, I tried to do it based on when we've been meeting before. But let's see, we need to set those anyway. Yeah, the 29th is a Wednesday, as is the 27th of October. Just trying to, those are the last Wednesdays. That,
Yeah, and I would, another question. So with this end date tentatively set for 10/27, what we would have is the final vote on this, right?
yes,
And the strategies?
yes.
Okay.
To send it back to, and we'll decide, I guess, whether we're adopting the strategies or simply accepting that strategy. But we'd be voting on at least the final recommendation then to have the council approve it.
The strategies is the staff part. I mean, it really is, as far as enforcement, action, is primarily staff. Now, I wouldn't say that it's all, see the funny face, but
I'm thinking proactive and just,
I'm
If
I'm
it's
just
not
saying, the
satisfactory, we'll
enforcement of
end
the
up pushing
code,
them
those-
until it is.
Those types of things.
I'm down with
The
that.
outreach to the neighborhood, there's other components to this that would be yours.
Well, and I shared a wonderful PDF with both Neil and Karen that has some strategies that have been working in much larger cities that,
Well, I'm not saying we have all the ideas, so
I'm-
we're very,
and these are very proactive and people-centered and align, I believe, quite well with this page. So I would like to offer those when it's time.
I said ours to do, not necessarily to come up with entirely.
Then,
Well, so we're going to help them. They're going to give us some proposals.
Yeah.
Then
We've
we're
got-
going to take
yeah,
it to the,
I was just
you'll
reviewing-
react, we'll take it
Yeah, I
to the
just was
council,
reviewing your-
take it
your
out.
letter.
yeah,
There's still
but
a lot of
it's
ideas.
proactive. It's very with our NIAs and that community, so it's gonna call for work on our.
No,
Are we
yeah,
satisfied?
we're gonna put it in a nice bow.
Proactive's good.
Wrap it up in a nice bow.
You what?
Proactive's good.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what we need. We're going for yes here. We're going to set goals that we all agree on, and we're going for yes. And we know that it's going to, for all this conversation and all the things we know we'd like to see go better, that we're going to have to get out of the box and do some things a little differently.
That's all of us.
All of us.
Yes,
That would
all
be
of us.
right here too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Chair, I
Yes,
have
sir.
2 questions.
Sure.
Reference future meetings. Did you say that there will be a meeting that will be discussing broadband?
Yes.
7:30.
When is that one?
That's the August, excuse me,
It's
July
30.
30th.
July 30th.
And the only reason I mention that is I have had some conversations with some East Topeka residents talking about broadband, and I just wanted to let them know when that was going to be.
Yeah.
And
And we'll talk about that just for a minute, the broadband stuff before we break.
Okay.
So,
And they can, I'm assuming they can sign up for public comments.
absolutely.
Okay. The second one is talking about the homeless conversations. On the last meeting in July, we do have Mr. Feeker from the Rescue Mission coming in, and they'll be presenting on the MAP concept that we are instituting here in the city of Topeka.
When you say the last meeting, are you talking about the council meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
a presentation that will be presented to the council. And so it may address some of the questions that you guys may
we were
have.
simply looking for an update, so if that's happening, it probably would be a great relief to everyone for us to take it off our agenda. You know, we've been trying to at least punch in once a quarter just to check signals, but if we're going to have that with the full council on Tuesday, the
27th, is it?
27th,
Yeah, and so Mr. Feeker with, I think Mark, is it DeGraff? Is that?
McGrath.
DeGraff. They'll be presenting on the MAP program, and that will also include some conversation about palletized housing and stuff like that. So it should be a very informative, and that may be able to alleviate some of the pressure on this committee or generate more questions.
thank you. Thank you very much for that. Make a note here.
And I can send you information on the map
We get closer.
as we get closer and what all it is.
Well, but if we're going to get it as council members, then that's just great. That will put that'll be a relief from our July 30 meeting. That's good to know. Okay, with that, I don't know if we absolutely have to adopt the calendar, but is there some consensus that this calendar could work for our progress on property and premises?
Yes.
Yes? Yes?
Blue.
All right. Well, we will count on that then. Our item number 4 is other items. I was just going to check signals about broadband that Chief of Staff brought up. Councilman Dobler, I don't know how much you've been in touch with the committee, but we went ahead and reached out to Scott Gowan and Lizone Grays about, we meaning Liz and I, just to make sure we were on deck, and we knew when we had to move the meeting from June, it was like, okay, how do we get everybody scheduled? What the communication in simple terms with them has been that I sent them out a checklist of what, in my view, as the chair, I felt like they needed to, if our goal is to come up with a broadband collaboration that will then move forward in the future to manage broadband development here, who would that be, how would they function, and so on. I'm not sure I copied everybody in, I can send it. Anyway, they've been working on a master plan. We had a request for a policy statement from staff, which we got a draft of just today, but it can carry forward to that meeting on the 27th, or the 30th, I'm sorry, is our meeting. They, Lizone and Scott, who've been kind of leading with Councilman Dobler, this working group, felt like they could put together a recommended plan by the 20th of July and get it into Liz so that it could be shared with us in advance of the meeting. We've now got the draft of the broadband policy statement. City manager was working with staff regarding the COVID money in terms of some recommendations. I don't know if you're ready yet, but
I can provide some.
you have a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. In the process of reviewing projects eligibility for ARPA money, most of that, from what we can tell so far and all the reviews we've done, is that it has to be for infrastructure. And in our community, there isn't much, we haven't found locations that need infrastructure. As has been mentioned, there is capacity from Cox and from AT&T to provide internet access. So their access is available, which is what the broadband money was created for. And so right now, we're not seeing any broadband projects that the ARPA money can be utilized for.
And define infrastructure. I mean,
Well, it's putting the fiber in the ground, putting the cable in the ground, for lack of a better term, so that if there's a block that doesn't have any cable or fiber that they can access internet through, then it's not available. Or a broadband or a Wi-Fi access or something like that in their neighborhood. That's the definition primarily that they've given. It's not being able to provide devices. It's, that's been some of the ideas that have been brought by the other committee, is that there's a need for devices. There are devices that can come from other businesses as they rotate out equipment. Looking at a, what do they call that, navigator? Yeah, digital navigator, to be able to help them understand how to access, how to use the equipment that's provided, how to use the internet, for lack of a better term, and utilize that device. And so ARPA money is for the infrastructure. Think of it as a water or sewer line that runs down the street. That's what the broadband money in ARPA is for. It's not for those other ancillary things that oftentimes are the last piece that needs to be done.
Okay, well, and I assume that information is being communicated to the working group?
I have not communicated it to them at this point, because I just
Okay.
completed that research last week.
Okay,
So it's,
Now, that is disappointing.
yeah, it is, but it
Very.
is, what you'll see is the rural areas of our country that have very, very limited access to internet or to broadband. They're going to benefit from it.
Right.
The urban areas have seen the build out of the systems to the point, where Cox has 1 meg service or 1 gig service across the city. There's a few pockets that can't quite reach that, but primarily they can say it's 1 gig across. You can access, you got to be able to afford it, but it is there. And so that's one of the things that we have to our advantage in an urban setting, as Topeka is, versus the rural areas that just don't have that fiber because it's so costly to run it. Almost like back when you had to create the electricity to the urban areas or to the rural areas. It's just very costly to lay that infrastructure for one customer every half mile. So
does that include hotspots?
hotspots, that's one thing that we could look at. There is some potential that if you get the large Wi-Fi systems, they may be an option there as well. A lot of even baseball parks and football stadiums and so forth are being able to provide
Seems
a
to be working.
Wi-Fi system to that large of an audience. And that's something that can be considered in certain locations in order to grant access where it's not available through a normal system. And I know AT&T is starting to do their first small cell project, and so their small cell systems are getting ready to start going up in various locations.
Well,
It
if
had
you
been
can get that
delayed, but it's-
communicated to the committee so that they've got that folded into their recommendations and observations, then we may want to deal with that specifically. There was also a chance that we would know by today about 2 different grants, the
Yeah,
Community Foundation and Health
I
Foundation.
just asked Monique, and the Global Marriage Challenge we were not successful on.
Right,
But the other one that she made application to, we will hear on Monday, is what she expects, right? Monday?
And who is that to? Topeka, is that through
Kansas
Topeka?
Health Foundation.
Kansas Health
yeah.
Foundation.
What I had from the minutes was 7.5, so I thought, well, how about that?
Yeah, that was the original target.
They changed, no, that's what they informed us as well, but they changed it as of last Friday.
Gotcha. And was there one out to the Community Foundation as well?
No.
Okay, so that was maybe a misunderstanding in the minutes. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, great. Then as long as any of those further developments get communicated to Councilman Dobler, are you actively thinking you're going to be able to meet with them, or is it really up to them this month, Neil?
No, I'll be meeting with them. The committee's meeting right now,
Oh,
coincided with this meeting, working on the plan.
okay, good. Well, they
I
already
think-
have this on their calendar, I guess.
Yep.
Great. Anything else you want to throw in while we're all here on broadband?
No, I think the city manager pretty well covered it. I guess I'll be going back and asking for more of a discussion of what's actually eligible. I think if it's just infrastructure, There are still some needs. There's parts of this community that even with Cox or AT&T fiber out front cannot connect and not afford to connect. And I think Luzone has shown a number of examples where a neighborhood-based Wi-Fi system is the answer to that. So I think even if we are totally stuck with infrastructure, I think there'll still be some opportunities that will help parts of the community that need it. So I'll just leave it at that.
Good. That must be maybe reading some of Lazone's stuff is where I had also seen that hotspot information. So that's good. Yeah, there's still a lot that people are gathering. All right. Sounds like then we can get a briefing on what's happening with homeless at the council meeting, and that we will have broadband and property and premises on our agenda for the 30th of this month. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned. Sort of.